tell us a little bit, moving on to the next slide here, on PCI compliance and some of the things we've been talking about, how those are going to help you in your PCI compliance. But I think
Sure.
before that, we should just do a high level view of what it means to be PCI compliant and how
Mhm.
as a merchant, we take those steps to become PCI compliant.
Yeah, sure. So it depends on the number of transactions that you process in a year, I believe. There's some levels there. So at the lowest level is a SAC-A, or a self-assessment questionnaire, where you have a responsibility to go through, because your revenue, your number of transactions per year is low enough. You have to assess. You still have all the same requirements that a larger merchant may, but they're a bit easier on you. It's sufficient for you as the merchant to go through that process yourself. I would still encourage you to get help. A lot of the terminology in PCI DSS is very jargon heavy and specific to that framework. And having the ability to talk to somebody who's been through it before is important. A qualified auditor from the PCI DSS community is the right group to talk to. They'll help you figure out whether you need to have a formal audit done, or whether it's tiering you as a merchant, whether you're a tier 1 merchant or one of the lower levels, and whether or not you have to do a self-assessment, or you actually have to go through the full process. So there's a lot there. It's a very deep topic, and talking to a QSA is probably the best place to get started in terms of understanding your requirements around PCI DSS. I would say that a lot of what we've talked about, even up until this point, right, in this conversation and others, we're really focused on helping our merchants increase the security of their websites. And a lot of what we talk about, you should be doing in one form or another. Now, you could come to us and we would deliver this functionality to you in one easy to consume way, or you work with somebody else, or you pick lots of different vendors to work with. But the key is that these things should always be done. And what I tend to find in merchants, new merchants that we start to work with, often there's parts of the puzzle that haven't been put in and locked into place. And so really, I mean, we're talking about it within the concept of, Magento 1 end of life and PCI compliance and how to maintain it. But it goes beyond that. I mean, it's really just sort of best practice, what you should be doing to protect your storefront, regardless of whether you've already upgraded to Magento 2 or you're about to upgrade to Magento 2. So maybe the patching is not as big a deal because you've got this, you're going to get there hopefully today, but possibly soon. So really the security that we're talking about, it's crucial to keep yourself safe, keep your web store safe from attacks on the internet. So
Yeah, and I think in this case too, it's always up to the merchant to make sure that they are PCI compliant. And we once had a new client who, and this was a long time ago, but they were on a platform that was shared, and it was a SaaS platform, but they were storing credit cards in their clear text in their customer records just so they could go back and reswipe them if they needed to. And that immediately puts them out of PCI compliance. So it's not just the platform itself, it's the practice that you have in maintaining your store no matter what store you're on. So just because you are on some other platform doesn't mean you're necessarily PCI compliance. And if the vendor that you have your platform from, and in this case Magento end of life, they're saying, well, we're not going to make sure that the code is PCI compliant anymore, but now it's up to you to make sure it's PCI compliant. At the end of the day, it's always up to the merchant to make sure their individual store is PCI compliant. And I think some of the rules that they've laid out here, even for when you do the self check, those self check are ensuring that you've done your due diligence and that you make sure that all those boxes are checked for your compliance.
Yeah, I think an important thing to note here, a lot of people think of PCI DSS compliance as almost a checkbox, but really it's a framework. And if you follow the PCI DSS group's framework for assessing the security of your storefront, if you follow that framework and do the things that are recommended there and ensure that, you know, that your store is compliant with those, you will improve the security of your storefront itself. So don't think of it as like a burden, but think of it as a way to ensure that if you're doing everything that they're recommending in terms of security, that by doing that, you're going to ensure that you're taking the right steps in terms of securing your storefront, you're being a responsible merchant, and you're helping your customers stay safe. So grandma's credit card's not going to get stolen coming to your store, and that's at the end of the day. And even doing this too, following the framework, it doesn't mean that by following the framework you won't be subject to a zero-day vulnerability or that you won't be compromised in the future. What it means is that you're going to be able to discover that compromise has happened and take action and control for it. So by taking these steps, you're protecting your storefront, your business, and you're helping the credit card community, you know, your customers, stay safe in this engagement as well. So.
Yeah, and just the last point you had on that slide was just making sure you have that plan in place, and how important that plan is to make sure that that you can respond if something happens. But in building that plan, you are going through that checklist. So just as a pilot would make sure that they've gone through the checklist before the plane takes off, you as a merchant still have a responsibility to go through that checklist to make sure that you're doing all those things and ensuring that your staff is also doing that. So you as a merchant may not know that your staff are storing all your credit cards in clear text in the shipping field or some field on the customer record that you don't think is going to be used, and then someday you suddenly send out a bunch of invoices with. Anyways, we can keep moving here.
Yeah.
So we have some steps here in maintenance, making sure that you're PCI compliant. And know we went through some of those steps, but what are the kind of main things that we have here to make sure that we are PCI compliant?
Yeah, I mean, the bullets here kind of lay it out, right? And it really gets to the spirit of what's in the PCI compliance is you're not just checking some boxes and, you know, getting past your audit or, you know, justifying yourself to QSA. The QSA wants to see the data collection, the processes defined, that you're following those processes, and there's evidence that you're doing what you say you do, that you are reviewing logs, and you're reviewing traffic, and you're reviewing the alerts that are coming out of your system, and that the system's being well maintained. And that, you know, I think one of the big things in here for M1 end of life is probably twofold. One is that you have a vendor for patches. So if you're going to stay on Magento 1 end of life, you still have to take action beyond end of life. And that action is really about getting involved with a provider of patches for your version of Magento to make sure that your software can continue to be maintained as vulnerabilities are identified. The farther you get out from June 30th, to make sure that you're getting access to those patches as they become available, so that you can continue to maintain your software. And you're going to have a bit more of a responsibility there, because now you own that code base. I mean, you always did, but now you're going to have to look at your coding practices, your team's coding practices, and make sure that you're following secure coding practices and how you're deploying into production. And, you know, anyone that's, you know, there's little things in there too about not having one person have access to the code and the production environment at the same time, and being able to separate those responsibilities and those concerns, so that you don't have one person that can be compromised and inject a security flaw or an active threat into your production environment.